I think that's the biggest part, isn't it? Is self-compassion through so much of this work. It's a really big part to play. And you do have your 12 touchstone points right at the end of the book. And self-compassion is one of the leading ones. And I love you write, which has literally stayed in my mind, shitty committee. It's one of my, it's like, I was like, didn't expect that to come out of your mouth at all. But could you explain a little bit about this? Because I think it's it resonated with me so much on how we can actually inflict a lot of pain during that, when actually we need to hold a lot of space for that self-compassion.
Yeah. So I'm glad you were surprised. You can't have rules for families. People want rules because then they think, well, if I'll tick off every bit of the rule, then I'm perfect. And none of us are perfect. And it isn't a place to even try and aim for. But I did 12 touchstones for the well-being of families, which are kind of attitudes and behaviors and ways of being that help support you and your family, given that we're all kind of doing the best we can and having hard times a lot of the time, or some of the time, whenever we do. And I think one of the complexities of suffering is that when we're hurting, we often hurt people, and then we often turn that hurt and rage against ourselves. And we have what I call a shitty committee, where we then attack ourselves, like, you idiot, why are you doing it like this? You should be okay by now. You're such a fool. Stop making such a fuss. Get on. Whatever all those critical voices are saying. And that just kind of compounds your suffering and gives you a narrow window of connecting to others, which is the place where we heal, is by the love and connection to others. So if we can kind of open our window, allow ourselves all of our different feelings, both the fury that we feel, the rage that we feel, the jealousy, the envy, and the love, and the sort of dark humor often in grief. If we can turn to ourselves with self-compassion, with as much kindness towards ourselves as we would to another, then that is releasing and opens us. And then our kind of window to ourselves is bigger for feeling. We calm down, the threat system calms down. And when we calm down, we can connect to our heart. And the thing that matters most whenever we are suffering is love. The love of the person maybe who's died, if they're bereaved, or the love of the people we're furious with, and the love of others, and the love for ourselves.
And so it brings me to like the next conversation, which is communication, which I think is really, really important, because a lot of us can shy away from conflict. I think it's a really natural human emotion, but it's also really important to, I think, address that head on. But it can be really difficult to have these conversations, especially in family dynamics. What advice would you give to help explore these difficult conversations, especially in family settings?
I mean, I think the place to start from is to recognize that every family will have conflict, that we will all fight. Because where, as I said before, where you love most, you hate most, and you have your biggest response. In some ways, indifference is the opposite of love, not hate. And that as a way of communicating in families, a kind of attitude is to allow difference, and to recognize that 7 people can have 7 different views, and there is no one right one, but to allow people to have their collective views with a kind of sense of collaborative power, that everybody has agency and can be heard. Probably the biggest kind of skill in communication is the capacity to listen fully to what the person is saying, to listen to what is going below the waterline, what they're feeling, where they're coming from, to look at their visual cues, and then to reflect and let them know that you've heard what they've said. And then once people feel heard, they feel kind of received enough to be able to listen then to what you have to say. And I think often we transmit so fast that the person doesn't feel heard. And then that's when you can have an escalation of, I'm right, you're right, I'm right, you're right. But also you will still have fights. And another of my touchstones is, fighting productively and how you fight makes a difference. So not using every past fight as weapons of mass destruction, but to fight specifically about, I'm really upset that you didn't take the bins out, or whatever the fight is. Not like you never bloody take the bins out, you're always so fucking lazy, because that you could, there's no way you can kind of deal with that. But the big thing after fights is repair, this capacity to repair after the rupture and to go slower together and have a level of intimacy about what was the fight really about. Can we understand each other better? What was really going on? And it's very rarely about the bins. It's much more about connection, attention, feeling loved, feeling safe, feeling known. And I think often a fight you can actually, once you've repaired, you can feel closer to someone. And so fights can be incredibly important in the kind of depth of understanding, because if you really know that you can have a fight and feel closer, you build a lot of trust and a lot of value in that other person, in your family. And that's as true within siblings as it is with parents and their children. And I think the sibling relationship, which I talk quite a lot about in Every Family Has a Story, is often underestimated how influential and how shaping it is
to each one's lives. Do you think there's a real difference between being the older sibling and the younger sibling?
Birth order definitely has a role to play. It's definitely an influence, isn't it? How crushing for the eldest child to have someone come and steal their spot. Whereas the youngest child's like, hey, I didn't know any different. I've got all these people who can play with me or hit me, depending on what their response to me is.
What are some of the factors that contribute to some families that thrive through adversity or others fragment? Because that's quite an interesting scenario. There's some families seem to really thrive through this and stick together, and there's others that can break apart. And what do you think are the factors that really play out there?
I think a lot of it is this flexibility and the capacity to allow difference, allow everybody to be themselves, that there isn't one way to solve a problem or one way of being given an event that's happened to the whole family. So allowing difference, I think, is a big thing. And knowing about how to express love. So love is a verb. It's not just a thing, I love you. It's like loving in action, loving by stepping back, loving by letting go, loving by repairing even when you fucking hate them, loving, loving doing the things you don't want to do because you love them. All of those ways of loving are what allow families to thrive in adversity.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, love?
It is.
It can be one of the most beautiful things on the planet and one of the most painful at the same time.
Loving is not a soft skill. It is hard. No. We see it on Disney movies and, happy ever afters. But loving is probably the most difficult thing we do.
Thanks so much for listening. To hear the full episode, there's a link in the description.